It's been a really tense week. It's been another week of horrors and brutal attacks, as we laid out in the news report. And of course, this comes on the heels of the assassination last week of Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, which came just hours after Israel assassinated Fuad Shukr, a top-level Hizballah commander, in an attack in Beirut. The region is closer, as Ali Abunimah wrote, to an all-out war that Israel claims it does not want, but seems to be doing everything in its power to provoke. Both Iran and Hezbollah have vowed a harsh response, but have refrained from announcing details about when it may come and what form it may take. In a speech Tuesday, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said the anxious wait imposed on Israel was part of its punishment. Israel's whole economy and society were effectively on hold. He also noted that Israel, while still strong, is much weaker than it used to be. Unable to defend itself and deter its enemies on its own, Tel Aviv must increasingly rely on the United States, European countries, and even Arab regimes to come to its rescue. Setting out a broad analysis of the regional picture, Nasrallah emphasized that at this stage, the priority for the resistance axis must be to prevent an Israeli victory against the Palestinian resistance. The Hezbollah leader warned that if the Palestinian resistance were to be defeated, nothing would stand in the way of Israel's plans to annex the occupied West Bank and exterminate or expel the Palestinian people to Jordan. No state in the region, especially Lebanon, would be safe, Nasrallah said. And yesterday, Hamas named Yahya Sinwar as its new Politburo leader following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, in a move that the political party said was made unanimously and with full consensus. Joining us to talk about all of this and to help make sense of what comes next is Helena Cobban. Helena is a writer and author with decades of experience and knowledge about the region. She's also the director of Just World Educational. She and Rami Khoury have co-edited a new book based on Just World's latest project, Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters, which will be published at the end of the month by OR Books. We'll get more into that later on. Helena, thank you so much for coming back on the live stream. It's so good to have you at such a critical time.
Well, it's great to be with all you guys. You've just done the most amazing job week after week, as you said. Like, who would have thought, like, 10 months?
Yeah. It's hard to understand every day. Well, you've reported from the region and on the region for decades. You were in South Lebanon in the 70s and 80s. You've also interviewed both Ismail Haniyeh and Khaled Meshal about Hamas and the ongoing political formations against Israel's settler colonial project in Palestine. Give us your sense, first off, of the significance of Haniyeh's assassination in terms of the immediate and the long-term aftermath and consequences.
Oh boy, how many hours?
In a few words, yeah.
Have you got? Okay, so the first thing I would say, since I'm here in Washington, D.C. on the traditional lands of the Piscataways, is that, you know, the United States, since the late 1970s, has totally monopolized all peacemaking diplomacy on the Arab-Israeli front in that theater, and continues to do so until today. And it has been monopolizing the negotiations, the diplomacy over a ceasefire and release of detainees and hostages completely. It's been a US-led negotiation, and then the Israelis go and assassinate the leader of the other party, Hamas. So this was a huge provocation, not just to Palestinians, not just to Iranians, because of course it happened in the capital of Iran when Haniyeh was visiting for the inauguration of Iran's new president. So, you know, that was a huge provocation, but it was also a provocation to the United States because it completely undermines, you know, the integrity. Okay, I say that in scare quotes, of the US mediation effort. So it's just like poking President Biden in the eye or in a much more sensitive part of his anatomy, honestly. And what does he do? He does nothing, except he says, oh, let's not have any further escalation. Like what the Israelis did last Tuesday, Wednesday night, right at the end of July, that was not an escalation. Of course it was, you know. So to me, it's okay. That's the biggest thing it's done. It's proven the degree to which Biden is not prepared to stand up to Netanyahu at all. I have a colleague, I forget who said that it's really an attempt to continue grooming Biden and the whole of the US political system to go along with the abuse, you know, in the way that an abusive spouse grooms his targets. And that's exactly what's happening here.
But like as if he would want to stand up to Netanyahu. I mean, there's that dynamic that, you know, the US is not even, you know, doing the finger wagging while sending, you know, more weapons. They're just sending more weapons. They're just sending these warships to the region, and then saying, you know, that they want to de-escalate. I mean, this is like classic American imperialist behavior, right?
Yeah. So you're right. They themselves take escalatory actions, and they don't hold Israel to account at all for the, you know, any of this like horrendous procession of escalatory actions that Israel has been taking for the last 76 years. The only time they really stood up to the Israelis was Eisenhower in 1956, when Eisenhower told the Israelis, the English and the French, to go back and, you know, to stop their aggression against Egypt. And intriguingly, that marked the birth of APAC in this country. APAC was founded by Maurice Amité and other people to ensure that 1956, what Eisenhower did that year, would never happen again.
That was also the birth of Labour Friends of Israel, incidentally. You know, as I'm sure you know, Helena, but maybe not all our viewers and listeners do, the Israel lobby in the UK is a slightly different configuration. There's no one mega APAC. There is a kind of an equivalent organisation called BICOM, but it's much smaller. It's more of a think tank. The political lobbying organisations are split by political party. And of course, right now, the most relevant one is Labour Friends of Israel. And they were born exactly the same moment. So that's really really interesting historical point. They were, because in 1956, of course, the Labour Party, even the so-called left of the Labour Party, were incredibly pro-Israel, quite deeply Zionist. But in 1956, the tripartite aggression against Egypt was too much for even some of them, for some of the Zionist politicians within the Labour Party, and there was some sort of minor critical rumblings against Israel, the sort of, well, this is bad for Israeli interests kind of thing, right, on those kind of levels. And so that was why Labour Friends of Israel was founded, because it was meant to shore up and you know, get that support back. So it's interesting to hear that there was a similar phenomenon over the Atlantic at exactly the same time with the foundation of APAC. I don't think I was aware of that.
Yeah, and of course APAC is still this massive force and has just taken down Cori Bush in Missouri. Cori Bush, who you know, came to prominence and entered politics as the result of the Black Lives Matter movement and what had happened in Ferguson, Missouri. So, and the lobby here, APAC, has been crowing about the extent to which it was their support that brought her down. So, yeah, and I mean,
they're boasting about it, and then at the same time they'll call you anti-Semitic for saying that the Israel lobby has an influence.
Yeah. Well, there is that. So, getting back to the question of the effects of Haniyeh's killing, which I didn't quite finish what I was going to say, is that obviously one of the first things that happened was the head of US CENTCOM, General Eric Kurila, went to Israel and sat down with the war criminal Yoav Gallant very early on. And what happened in Tehran at the same time was that the head of Russia's National Security Council, the former defense minister, I forget his first name, but he's Shoigu, General Shoigu, went to Tehran and has been coordinating with the Iranians. So clearly this confrontation that is looming in the region in West Asia has massive geopolitical impact. And we don't know what it's going to be. What I can recall is that in April, after the Israelis on April the 1st launched that first, well, not the first, but a significant provocation by killing the Iranian Revolutionary Guards people in their embassy in Damascus. That was a huge violation of international law, the Vienna Convention, everything else. And the Iranians waited 12 days before they responded. And they had a very, very smart, sophisticated, multi-pronged response to that. Took them 12 days to do it. This one, I think, of course, in the present case, we had the Israelis killing the military chief of Hizballah in South Beirut, as well as Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. And I think, obviously, there's clear coordination between Hezbollah and Iran, which is not to say, and as you noted, I think, Nora, Hezbollah and the Iranians may undertake different responses, differently timed. And meantime, the Israelis are, some people say, bracing for what's to come. But I think they are actually scared shitless. Because last time, the April action by the Iranians was extremely smart. They managed to get drones and missiles. They sent them from many different places over the course of hours and hours. And of course, many of those, nearly all of them, got shot down, both mainly by the Americans and the Jordanians who were working with the Americans. But that enabled the Iranian controllers of the operation to see, what the capabilities of the air defense operations were, and to put through 2 very significant missiles dead on against Israeli military bases. It's so smart. And it revealed the weaknesses of all this so-called multi-layered David Sling, Iron Dome, all this stuff that the Israelis and Americans have spent years building in order to protect Israel's airspace. So, for now, I think there's an old saying that revenge is a dish best served cold. And I think, that's what the Iranians, that's what Hassan Nasrallah effectively said. And they're just letting the Israelis stew in their terror for a little while. But of course, this is not bringing the genocide in Gaza to an end.
That's right. Well, Helena, what are your thoughts on Yahya Sinwar being named as the new leader, the new top leader of Hamas? And this is to replace Ismail Haniyeh. Ismail Haniyeh, of course, was more of a politician, more of a political figure, even though, a reconciliator. I'm sure you remember just as well as I do, Helena, back in 2006, of course, he was elected the leader of the Palestinian Authority, and he still remained with a large degree of popular support amongst Palestinians right up until his death. Yahya Sinwar is not so much of a politician. He's somebody. I mean, he's still within the political wing of Hamas, but he's somebody who is viewed as having very close ties to the military wing of Hamas, and he, of course, is based in Gaza itself. Whereas the previous political leaders of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh and Khalid Mashal, before him, were both based in Qatar, and before the war in Syria in Damascus. What are your thoughts? What you've interviewed Ismail Haniyeh, and I believe Khalid Mashal as well. Is that right?
That's right. I haven't interviewed Yahya Sinwar.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the message that Hamas is trying to send by this new appointment? So
in our the series of webinars that we are about to publish as a book, we had really good conversations with 5 people who have studied Hamas very deeply, much more deeply than either Rami or Rami Khouri, who is my co-pilot on this project. And one thing that several of them said is that you shouldn't look at Hamas's internal politics in a binary way. It's not like, the military versus the political, the moderates versus the radicals. It's a very much more complex, interlocking set of constituencies and individuals and grassroots organizations. So I won't give you the whole contents of the book because, of course, I want people to go out and buy it. If you go to the OR Books website, you can get a 15% discount. But obviously, Sinwar and Haniyeh were essentially classmates together at the Islamic University of Gaza. They are both, Gaza. Abner Gaza, they were from the heart and soul of the refugee experience in Gaza. I have for a long time said, ever since I worked on my PLO book back in whenever it was, actually 40 years ago this year, it was published, 1984, that Gaza has been the crucible of every single, Palestinian national liberation movement in modern times. And so for Sinwar and Haniyeh, they were very close, very close. Slightly different experiences, but, both of them in and out of jail. Haniyeh left later to go and be in the headquarters. But I don't think there's that much daylight between them. The operational relevance of killing Haniyeh is that, it's a little bit harder for the Qatari and Egyptian diplomats to connect directly with the head of Hamas now that the head of Hamas is in Gaza. But of course, previously, when they were coordinating or, communicating with Haniyeh in Qatar, he always had to coordinate with Sinwar in Gaza. So, this, you could say it complicates things a little bit, but maybe it also in some ways, in terms of the communications involved in this negotiation, simplifies things. Because we know unequivocally that, Yahya Sinwar, the new head of the political bureau, a lot of people like to say Politburo, and then I think, that makes it sound like the Soviet Union. It's very othering to call it the Politburo. I do it myself sometimes.
I guess that might be the idea. But this is an interesting point about the structure of Hamas. They do have this kind of collective leadership.
They certainly do. And, this political bureau has representatives from the Gaza constituency, from the West Bank constituency, from the diaspora Palestinian constituency, and from the prisoners. Prisoners are in just a terrible situation these days. We need to underline that. All prisoners are in a terrible situation. But Khalid Mashal, getting back to the question of the internal politics of Hamas, Khalid Mashal was definitely from the diaspora Palestinian wing of Hamas. He grew up in Jordan, well, diaspora and West Bank, not Gaza. And then he became really politicized in Kuwait when there still was Palestinian political organizing in Kuwait in the late 1980s. So he had a somewhat different trajectory. Who knows how this is going to affect everything? But the political bureau and the political structure of Hamas remains intact. These decapitation actions that Israel takes again and again and again against resistance movements, going back to Ghassan Kanafani and everybody in Fatah back in the 1970s. They don't succeed in wiping out the movement. They don't succeed in rendering the movement, in splitting it or making it inoperable. They strengthen the movement. And, Hamas obviously has survived just terrible waves of decapitation going back to the late 1980s and through the 1990s, and then in the 2000s, they wiped out an entire echelon of Hamas leaders, including, of course, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and Abdulaziz Rantisi and Ismail Abu Shanab. And so Hamas knows how to survive.
Yeah. And then, of course, John will get into this a little bit later, but not just the political bureau and its leadership structure has survived and is resilient, but the fighters in the armed wing are also resilient and they reorganize. Let's kind of talk more about that. Netanyahu says he's adamant about, he says, increasing the military pressure on Hamas to achieve, quote, all of the war's goals. And Israeli media reports say that the government is, quote, confident of U.S. backing in an event of retaliatory strikes. This is from the Jewish Insider. Citing Israeli officials, the report says that there could be a cooperative effort on the part of Israel and allies such as the US and the UK to intercept as many missiles as possible, as occurred during a previous attack by Iran in April. Despite reports of antipathy between Netanyahu and the administration of US President Joe Biden, of course, that's all projection, the United States has thus far refused to consider steps such as suspending arms transfers to Israel, ignoring calls to use US leverage to bring Israel's war on Gaza to an end. And meanwhile, as you write in your latest newsletter, there is an implosion of key Israeli institutions. And to some extent, you write of Jewish Israeli society itself that has recently been unfolding at near warp speed. And we've talked about this with Shir Hever and with Ilan Pappé last week. But what are you looking at right now as Israel seems determined to expand the war while it implodes from within?
Yeah, well, when you say Israel seems determined to do X, Y, or Z, I think, it is so... it's so split down the middle that now you have the messianics. By the way, that was a super episode you had last week with Ilan Pappé. Really enjoyed that hugely. Learned a lot from it. But so right now you have the messianics, who are kind of like the hilltop youth or whatever, who they are completely out of control, like that mutiny that they riot/mutiny that they fomented. When was it? On the 29th of July, in Sede Teman, trying to prevent the detention of the rapists. This big demonstration in support of the right to rape. I mean, those people they're not marginal in Israeli politics.
This is really astonishing. I think we might have to have a whole live stream on this, to be honest. Maybe next week we'll talk about it more, but it's so... I don't know what to say about it. There's been more news that are just broken about it. This horrific CCTV video of institutionalized rape of Palestinian prisoners by Israeli prison guards going on at these torture facilities. And as you said, there is this large and influential faction of Israeli society and Israeli politicians who are incredibly vocal about making sure this continues. I can't think of a precedent of this in history.
I mean, I've talked since like October the 8th, maybe, Asa and Nora, about Israeli society having become unhinged. And we're seeing this in real time. So these, like the messianics, the right to rape crowd, they have super high level support within the government from Ben Gvir and from Smotrichs. I mean, both of these guys have recently come out with the most outrageous, openly pro-genocidal incitement statements. So, and we used to think back in the late 70s when there were like Likud young men going out and settling on the hilltops in the West Bank or whatever. Oh, it's just young men and they're very marginal. These young men are, number one, they've grown up and they've had children, and their children are just as bad, if not worse. And they are definitely not marginal in the politics of Netanyahu's political survival. So, he is definitely listening to them more than he is to the heads of the army and the various army like intelligence and other bureaus that are saying we cannot win the war in Gaza. You are putting the lives of the remaining hostages in peril by continuing the fighting. So that takes us to another constituency, which is the kind of hostage families constituency, which, Haaretz and the Western media, love to take photos of the marches and the protests and the demonstrations. And they say thousands of people were demonstrating outside Netanyahu's place in Caesarea or whatever. But actually, these people are fairly marginal to Israeli politics right now. They, some of them are wonderful people. Some of them are, just Israeli nationalists who want their family members back. I guess they're represented by Benny Gantz or somebody like that at the political level. And then now you have another constituency, which is the anti-Zionist Haredim, who have been taken for granted for a long time. And after October 7th, there was some real hope from the Zionist nationalists that they could persuade large numbers of the Haredim to enlist or be conscripted or join the military forces. But the attempts to force this to happen, much of which has been spearheaded by the Zionist left, have completely backfired. So, the Haredim in Mea Shearim and other places are massively resisting and also taking over, bursting into military bases in Israel, following the example of the right to rape crowd. So, I mean, in terms of having a military political system that has integrity and clear lines of command and clear goals and a clear strategy, this is all crumbling in Israeli society. And I have to say, it's a very scary situation because the extremists are clearly in control. As we see, with all these young men, some of them American citizens or, French or British citizens who are in the IDF, and they go and they blow up an entire tower block, or the one who blew up the water treatment plant in Rafah and live streams it and spreads it, to his followers worldwide, as though this is something that we should all think is a glorious action. I mean, these are the people to whom Netanyahu is currently responsible and who are being empowered and enabled within the Israeli military.
Yeah.
And it's not just an aberration either that, you know, as Ilan Pappé has said, and many people have said, that this is just, you know, Smotrich and Ben Gvir and Netanyahu are just like the more honest face of what Israel has always been and what Zionism has always represented. I mean, Smotrich, yesterday when, you know, you mentioned these like genocidal statements, Smotrich, I think it was yesterday, time is abstract these days, but this week, he said, you know, yes, starving 2 million Palestinians in Gaza would be the moral thing to do. It's just that the international community won't let us. So saying, you know, the quiet part out loud that Zionists have always said over the last century about trying to exterminate Palestinians. But also, like, it's inaccurate to say that the international community won't let Israel starve, because that's what Israel is doing right now.
And the international community is letting them.
Letting it happen. Exactly. It's just quite an your head just kind of spins with the amount of gaslighting you know, coming from not just the top echelons of the Israeli government, but the Israeli public itself, which is you know, fighting for the right to rape Palestinians and you know, turn off the water and bomb schools, and you know, they're talking about resettling the Gaza Strip, of course. Meanwhile, I mean, how, you know, if there is a war, and we've been talking about this for months, but if there is an escalation of this regional war and Israel decides to reinvade South Lebanon, or, you know, start bombing Iran, I mean, how do they expect it to go for Israel, for its you know, not just its military, which is already, like, you know, attrited, but but the society in general, who are, you know, many we've seen this week, you know, people scrambling to try and leave Israel, people, you know, posting, you know, videos of themselves inside bunkers in Tel Aviv. I mean, what do they think is going to happen?
Good question. I'm not sure that Netanyahu had thought through that much. I mean, he was fairly eager last week for a quick victory. I think, you know, like, let's kill Haniyeh while we can, and let's kill Fuad Shukr while we can. And that was probably, you know, the extent of his ability to think at that time. Of course, if there is a major escalation of the kind you've referred to in the region, this is not just Israel versus the axis of resistance, because there are, you know, in excess of 46,000 American military people stationed at bases throughout the whole of the Middle East. Now, I suppose a large number of those are in Qatar. Qatar plays the most, like, complex role in all of this, because, you know, as we know, they've been the hosts for Hamas leaders, and before that they were hosts for the Afghan Taliban, you know, the leaders there, the people who were anti-US, fighting the US in Afghanistan. But they also host the largest military base in the Persian Gulf, the Al Udeid base. So it's playing this very complicated role. And there are obviously a lot of American military in Syria, in Jordan, in Iraq, some in Saudi Arabia, a lot in the Emirates. And then there's the naval forces in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, and so on. So, you know, in the event of a major conflagration, all of these would be very, very much at risk. And they know that. They've seen what's happened in the Red Sea with the Houthis and the Houthi capabilities. I mean, the capabilities of, you know, these very interesting, like, people from Yemen, which nobody had ever, like, a year ago thought would be a major factor in international politics. And suddenly, you know, the Ansar Allah in Yemen, you have to take that into account. And shipping companies around the world are having to send their ships around the Cape of Good Hope. And like it's been had major impact on global supply chains. So I guess what I'm saying is, for a long time, I've thought that the Israelis would not escalate to a point that it threatens the American military positions around the region. But now I think they might be prepared to do that, just to stick it to Joe Biden. And to, of course, there's also been a really interesting poll came out this week that was a poll taken in this country by, I have to say, fairly conservative and pro-war organization called the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, something like that. And they found for the first time that a majority of American citizens do not want to have American troops sent to protect Israel. You know, that is new. That is, you know, part of the fallout from the resistance that we've seen from the people of Gaza and the people around the region, that Americans do not want to see our young men and women out there dying for Israel. That's significant.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a quick question about Jordan, really related to what you're talking about, this potential regional conflagration, which, I mean, and I guess we could say is already starting, really. Iran's much anticipated response to the recent assassinations of Ismail Haniyeh and Fuad Shukr, the top Hizballah commander in Lebanon, is raising questions on how other actors in the region may position themselves. In April, of course, as you've already mentioned, Jordan actually helped Israel and the US to block Iranian projectiles fired towards Israel. Helena, how do you anticipate what Jordan will do, how they may position themselves in this situation? Does it have much of a choice given the 2021 agreement between Jordan and the US that provides the US military with unimpeded, that's the word that's used in the agreement, I'm told, unimpeded rent-free use of Jordanian facilities and free movement of US military personnel? What do you think?
I think in the event of this regional conflagration, you know, if it happens, then Jordan would do exactly what we saw it do in April, which is, you know, have the military cooperate with the Americans and Brits in protecting Israel and cooperate with Israel openly, which they've been doing, as we know, for many years. But the caveat is that in April, it didn't work. You know, enough of the Iranian, maybe 7 of the Iranian missiles got through, with their way having been cleared by the smaller missiles and drones that went through before. So Jordan, of course, is in a complicated situation. It was created as an independent state by the Brits, precisely to be a kind of Bantustan for Palestinians as they were being displaced by the Zionists. So, you know, obviously, as we know, Jordan has a majority of ethnic Palestinian citizens and large refugee camps. So they've always had, from King Hussein, you know, through King Abdullah, they've had to tread a fine line and find a way to deal in some way with the Palestinian political reality, which they've done overwhelmingly by oppressing Palestinians in Jordan. And it's difficult for Palestinians to organize in Jordan. But I just want to come back to like the global level. We are now, today it's August the 7th. We're halfway between the anniversary of the US atomic bombing of Hiroshima, which was August 6th, and the US atomic bombing of Nagasaki, which was August 9th. And, you know, those were very, very important moments in global history. I feel that we're at something like that right now. And, you know, Israel has nuclear weapons, either ready to go, or you just like screw two parts together and then they're ready to go. I don't think its nuclear weapons are any use to it at all right now, honestly. They've always had a deterrent function, but they haven't deterred this current wave of resistance from around the region. And I think just it's been my hope for a long time, but specifically over the last 10 months, that this era of US monopolization of Arab-Israeli diplomacy needs to come to an end. And I think the fact that the Russian National Security Chief, General Shoigu, in Tehran, consulting on military matters with his counterparts in Iran, but also offering to be a mediator between Iran and Israel. That is interesting. You know, Russia as a mediator between Iran and Israel. So the world is changing. It's not changing nearly fast enough. But I just found that kind of a fascinating little thing. Of course, if we do go back to the time of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those were undertaken primarily as to warn the Russians not to come down the eastern part of the Asian landmass. But anyway, here we are again.
That's yeah. I think the entire world doesn't want anything to come near to that again. But we have to see, and Israel is the most belligerent liability for world peace. You know, at this point, next to the U.S., of course, and yeah, I mean, it would be incredible. You know, we just saw. You know, you mentioned Russia trying to mediate. We just saw Beijing mediating the Palestinian Unity Declaration 2 days. I think it was 2 days before Haniyeh was assassinated. So yeah, it is incredibly significant that you know, while the U.S. continues its tired old song of saber rattling and sending more weapons and threatening to send more U.S. troops and, you know, padding Israel's you know, armories with even more weapons, other superpowers are doing the diplomacy thing, and we'll see. Hopefully, you know, what happens. And meanwhile, the genocide in Gaza is ongoing. Well, we just have a few minutes left, but we wanted to talk about the book that you and Rami Khoury are putting together that, as you mentioned, is going to be out from OR Books in a few weeks. Tell us about the book, Understanding Hamas and Why It Matters, and why it's significant to put something like this together at this time, especially.
Thanks. Well, this was a decision that we made on the board of Just World Educational to initially launch a project that would be a series of webinars, which we did. We presented the 5 webinars in May, and they were actually very much more successful than we had dared to hope. We had 5 wonderful specialists, Dr. Paola Caridi, their names are all down at the bottom there, who's an Italian journalist and analyst who has spent time in the occupied territories and did a lot of interviewing of Hamas people, I want to say in the aughts and the early teens of the current century. And Jeroen Gunning, who's a Dutch researcher who's done a lot of interviewing, Khaled Haroub, who lives in Qatar, and I mean, all these people have deep expertise in the internal politics of Hamas, and Moain Rabbani, who was just, you know, he was looking at so many aspects of the situation. Our last guest expert was this guy from London called Dr. Azam Tamimi, who is, you know, he's a kind of a senior figure within the political firmament that gave birth to Hamas. And he's a real expert on Islamic political thought. And he has been close to many of the leaders of Hamas over the years. So it was really good to have him on and, you know, answering the tough questions. And actually, Nora, since you're a board member of Just World Educational, you were in that last session. And so the book is essentially the transcripts of our sessions. And we also put in the some basic documentation about Hamas, which people in the West are completely unfamiliar with. Like, you know, there's the people in the West know about the 1988 Hamas Charter and how scary that is. They don't know about the 2017 Hamas Declaration of Principles, which updates things considerably. They don't know about, you know, all the reports into the 2006 parliamentary election in the West Bank and Gaza, and the fact that Hamas won the election, which was free and fair. So we, you know, we present some of that documentation, and we want the book to be accessible to people who are not specialists in the affairs of West Asia. You know, just like community activists, church groups, you know, anti-war activists worldwide throughout the Anglophone world. So we're really lucky that we're working with OR Books, because they do publish simultaneously in London and New York, and they can ship anywhere in the world. So, you know, hopefully maybe Tamara can put our QR code up on the screen so that people can then like take it, and or maybe not. Whatever.
They can go to the website for sure. It's right there. Yeah.
So the reason we did it is because, like, even amongst many people who are outspoken and really active in support of humanitarian aid for Gaza and sharing all these, you know, like horror stories and like saying you've got to treat the people of Gaza as humans, but they don't want to talk about Hamas, because they have kind of, I won't say drunk the Kool-Aid, but I would say like they've been unacceptably affected by all the anti-Hamas propaganda. And like when Israeli or Zionists, you know, propagandists say all Palestinians are Hamas, right. You know, therefore they, you know, therefore it's justified to kill them all. You know, people don't know what Hamas is, what it has done in the past, what its roots are, the fact that it has taken decisions at certain points to launch violence against Israeli civilians. It has taken decisions at other points to stop that violence. And those are all determined by the offers that they have repeatedly made to the Israeli authorities. We will immunize your civilians. You know, we will not attack your civilians if you stop attacking our civilians. Can we both have an agreement that we won't do that? And the Israelis have turned that down every single time. So, you know, when Hamas decided to participate in the 2006 elections, the year before, they stopped all their military actions, both against Israel. Well, they've only ever taken military actions against Israel and against some Israeli collaborators. And they participated in good order in that election. And all the Palestinian factions, including Fatah and, you know, Mahmoud Abbas, and the Israelis and the United States and the Europeans all said, let's have them in the process. And they entered the process. They won the election. And then Fatah and the Israelis and the US couldn't take that defeat and came down so hard against Hamas and enacted the siege that the people of Gaza have been living under. So, you know, all of that history needs to be understood as a precursor to what happened on October 7th and as a guide to what we can do now in terms of negotiating with Hamas, which I have to underline, this government of Israel and our government here in the United States have been negotiating with Hamas since very early on over the release of the hostages and the detainees and a ceasefire. And, when it happened for 7 days back in November, it worked. And then that ceasefire fell apart. So, at the same time that they are negotiating with Hamas, they are still, the Israelis and the American authorities and the European authorities and all those people, demonizing Hamas. So, are they actually negotiating in good faith? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's incredibly important, and I'm very proud to be on the board of Just World Ed and helping to usher that book into the world. Again, you can go to either justworldeducational.org or the website for OR Books and pre-order a copy. And Helena, finally, give us just a rundown of the Palcast that you and our contributor Yusuf El-Jamal also put together that people can listen to.
Yeah, well, we had a really good recording session today. We're doing these Palcast podcasts once a week, and Yusuf El-Jamal is really in charge. He's in Istanbul, Turkey, and he brings on nearly all the guests. And then we also have Tony Groves, who's with us from Ireland. I love having his Irish brogue on there. And, so most of Yusuf's guests, most of our guests are Palestinians from Gaza. Last week, we had Ahmed Naouk, who was working with Refat al-Arir on We Are Not Numbers. And Ahmed said something that just broke my heart, because he had, like so many of his family members were killed, I want to say in late October in a bombing in Gaza against their refugee camp. Maybe 21, however many members of his family just killed. And there he was in London. He said, sometimes I feel jealous of those are my family members who were killed because they have not had to live through the last 10 months of absolute agony that the rest of us have. And I don't know why. I mean, I'm not really, I am a sentimental person, but that really touched me to the quick when I heard him say that you feel jealous of people who've been killed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I've heard that a couple times from people over the last 10 months, and it says so much. And the book again is called Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters. You have a copy of it there.
Whoops.
There we go. From OR Books, and check out the Palcast with Helena and Yusuf. Helena, as always, it's so good to have you. And
thank you, Helena.
Yeah, thanks for being with us.
Great to work with both of you and Tamara and Ellie behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much.